Assalamu alaikum. Welcome today to the building cross-platform applications using Windows Azure. It seems that you are the few ones to have weathered the cold today, so thank you for that. I hope the session is both entertaining and educating. Just a show of hands, how many of you know what Windows Azure is? 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. So, my name is Fazan Khan. I am a solutions architect at Microsoft. For those who do not know me, I basically engage with developers, IT pros, and part of our team, it is our responsibility to bring the technology to you all, to help you understand what the technology is and help you all adopt it. So, Windows Azure has been here for quite some time. We started with platform as a service, where we offered developers to build highly scalable solutions. Then we went into infrastructure as a service. But then there was that area we found that for developers who were coming into the mobile world, they wanted something which was easy to adopt and something still highly scalable. So the team which built the mobile Azure services basically went out to developer camps, hackathons, and they interviewed people, they spoke to developers, and they asked them what their pain points were. And of all the things that they discussed, the key elements that came out was that we want something that we can start very quickly, right? We want something that we can implement quickly. I am a developer. I want to concentrate on the front end. I want to have that very nice looking, UI, something that my customers, my users are going to appreciate. But I don't want to spend time sitting and, creating web services. That's not what I do. That's not what I am very good at. I don't want to sit and manage the database. I'm not a DBA. I do not know what scripts are. So if you divide the developer community, basically you have three types of developers. You have, the hobbyists, you have the professional developers, and then you have the enterprise developers. Azure Mobile Web Services was initially targeted towards the first two, mainly the hobbyists and the professionals. But we've seen that a lot of enterprise customers also have started adopting it. They have liked the model so much, they appreciate it, and they want more out of it. So that's what we're going to cover today, what Azure Mobile Services is. So this is our agenda for today. I'm going to take you through a walkthrough of, can you see the slides, or should we dim the slides a little bit? Can we dim the slides, the lights a little bit? Okay, that's better. So we're going to start with an overview of what Azure Mobile Services are, right? And we're going to talk about building Azure Mobile Services. So we're going to spend a lot of time today actually building an application. So it's just not theory and me talking to you about something that you don't understand. We're actually going to build something that you can see and feel. We're talking about some of the key elements that we support in Azure Mobile Services, and one of them is authentication, push notifications, right? And then we'll wrap up the whole thing when we talk about how we can leverage the platform that Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 now bring to the developers, that is WinRT, and how you can leverage the APIs to write a single class that can probably be used between both the platform. So reuse of code, helping you build applications that can go across the different platforms, right? Specifically when you talk about Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8. So the whole, if you look at the session today, is going to be basically sort of two parts. The first part we are going to talk about is Azure Mobile Services, which is something that we are targeting for .NET developers, iOS developers, Android developers, and the others. Right? So that's something we're going to cover. And then we are going to look from a .NET perspective, how you can reuse some of the client code that is there, some of the the .NET code that is there to support both the platforms. Right? So I'll go back one step because I like this picture very much. It sort of depicts what Azure Mobile Services is in one shot. So if you see here, right, the predominant part of Azure Mobile Services is the server logic, right? And that's what it brings to you as a developer. Help you start building that backend for your applications that you can take across the different platforms. So we support, as of today, phone, we support Windows 8, we support iOS, and we have the Android also in development. It should be out soon. Right? So you can reuse this backend platform with native APIs from the different platforms. So you have a native API for iOS, so you're going to program in your iOS Objective-C environment. You're going to program in Java, you're going to program in Windows Phone. So it's a native API that talks to the same backend. Then it brings to you the power of the database with the simplicity of scripting. And I'll talk about that when we do the demos. So you do not need to be a DBA. You do not need to be a scripting guru to understand how to manage databases, how to create tables, etc. So we show you how easy it is to take just a class and create a database out of it. Or you already have an existing database. You take that database and you bring it in and start building applications. We support notifications across the different platforms. So push notifications for iOS, Windows Phone, Windows 8. We have a lot of diagnostics built into the system. We have a lot of logging. So if you are writing server-side code, you want to know what's happening on the backend server, we support that also. And the most important thing is scalability. So you are building a client application for phone or iOS or whatever device that you're building on, and you turn out to be the next, Angry Birds developer, and your application skyrockets. It goes boom. What do? Does your backend support it? Can your application scale well on that? So with the Azure Mobile Services, we provide you the capability from going from one instance to two instances to two instances, so you can scale at your own, liking. We don't hold you down. Right? So from a backend perspective, if you want to scale, we provide you the scalability. And for those who know what the Azure platform is, it's highly scalable. Right? You can scale out as and when you like. It's pay-as-you-go model. And then most importantly, we take that headache of authentication away from you. So you don't need to manage the user IDs. You do not need to manage the passwords. You do not need to write the script, to make sure that the person is authenticated. We integrate with Twitter, Google, Windows Live, and Facebook, so that you can use these authentication mechanisms in your application and authenticate the users. So if you talk about Windows by itself, right, the previous version of Windows was built on Windows CE, right? So that is 7.1, 7.5. With the release of 8.0 and Windows 8, right, Microsoft has sort of started converging the two platforms together. So they both share the same kernel. So the underlying OS kernel is the same. It's both on the Windows Phone and Windows 8, right? So as developers, we can start leveraging those APIs that are common between the two. And that's what we're going to talk about today, how you can leverage those APIs between the two platforms. So let me walk you through what Azure Mobile Services is. As I told you, most of the time we will spend in demos, in code, right? So that you have a better understanding what the product is like. So you go to the portal, which is at windowsazure.com, and you have various options there. Excuse me. Can we hook this to the power, please, somebody? There's no slot to put this in. उधर जगह नहीं है. हाँ? वो निकाल देने का? उसका जरूरत नहीं है, उस सीधा जाएगा ना? अडेप्टर का जरूरत नहीं है? जरूरत है? ठीक है? ओके. थैंक यू. So as I said, we have this portal which provides you all the information, all the capabilities of Windows Azure. So if I go here to develop, it highlights the platforms that we support on Windows Azure. So we have .NET, we have Node.js, we have Java, PHP, Python, anything else that you would like to bring. The most important for us today is the mobile platform. So if you're new to Azure Mobile Services, you can come in here. There are a lot of great tutorials, and they have samples that walk you through the whole process, right? So I'm going to go and log in. And what I get is the Azure Portal, right? So this provides me all the capabilities of Windows Azure. I can create websites, I can create SQL databases, I have storage. Can you see from there, or is it too small? Is it better? Is it better now? Okay, because the projector is very blurred. So in here, I have something called mobile services. If I click on this, I can create a new mobile service here. So let me click on this. It says create a new mobile service. I will provide a URL for my mobile service. So let's call it mobile demo. And then I can choose to use an existing database. So I told you earlier that if you have an existing database, you can bring it to mobile services, or you can create your own new database. So let's create a new database instance. All right. I choose the East region, click next. So we have our data centers across the world, right? We have some of them in the US, we've got 2 in Europe, and we've got 2 in Asia. So you can choose where you want to have your application located. Now I can choose an existing database server, or I can create a new one. I'll choose an existing database server. So, mobile demo. Just give me a second. So let's create one. We call it mobile demo. I choose to create a new one. Click next. It gives you a database name, or you can provide one of your own. I choose an existing server. I provide my server password. And then I can choose to provide advanced configuration settings. And what this allows me to do is choose the edition of the database that I want. So I can go in a web edition from 1 to 5 GB. If I'm taking a larger session, I can start from 10 to 150 GB. All right. So we'll go with the 1 GB, click next. And now it's going and provisioning a database for me. All right. So now if I am a developer, I don't need to understand what a SQL database is, what a database server is, how to provision a database server. In a few clicks, I have a database server for myself, right? So that's what we are talking about, a highly productive environment. So my database is created, my Azure services are created. Now, in order to work with this, right, these databases are sitting behind a firewall. Right? So if I click on this database section, go to the database I just created. So if you see here, just go back one. It gives me the name of the server, right? And it gives me the name of the database. Right? I can see the server name. So if I click on it, it gives me the connection to the server. I can reset the server password from here. If I go back, if I click on the database, it takes me to the database, and in here it gives me diagnostics. All right? So it shows me how many deadlocks I have, how many failed connections, how many successful connections, how long my service has been running. Right? Now, if I want to connect to this database from a .NET application or any other application, I can choose the connection strings from here. So you have ADO.NET, ODBC, PHP, JDBC. So all the connections are there for you to use. Right? Also, if you notice here, it says allow connection in firewalls. Now, what this means is, if I want to connect from my client, right, from where I am, into the server, I need to have an IP opened into the backend firewall. So the way you do that is you say manage allowed IP addresses, and it gives you a list of IP addresses allowed. I can go and delete a few if I like. And I can add the current one. So this is the current IP address from where I'm logging in. I say add allowed IP address and I say save. So now I can connect from my client, my laptop, into the backend service. Now if you see here, you have an option to manage this database from here. If I click on this, it will open a new browser window, and it's going to give me a UI where I can manage my database from the web. I can design it, I can run scripts on it, I can run commands. So I have a full-fledged design environment without having any tools on my PC. But if you are a traditional developer, right, and you want to take advantage of Visual Studio and you want to use the native UI that you are used to, we have something called SQL Server Data Tools that integrate SQL Server capabilities in Visual Studio. So let me show you that also. So let me go back here. So we're going to create a new project. And we will call that, we'll create a phone project and we will call that MS Events WP. So I'm just creating a blank Windows Phone project because we are going to use it. And then if I come here into the Server Explorer, right, I have a list of servers that I'm connected to. If you see here, I'm already connected to this server that I have on Windows Azure, right? I have a connection to it. I can refresh. So while that's refreshing, let's log into our database. Seems the network is not very strong. Also, sometimes you might find that you are not able to connect and it says connection failed. It could be that it takes time for the firewall rules to be applied. So if you give it a few minutes and try again, you'll find a successful connection. Let's close this, let's try it again. Also, if you see here, there's an option below which says Windows Azure Services. Windows Azure, as I told you, sits on our data centers. So if you do not allow this option, even your other applications that might be on the same data center might not be able to communicate with your database, right? So if you want to have applications sitting in your in the same data center and want to connect from there with your database, then you need to enable this option from here. It's interesting. Okay, let me try something else. Okay, there you go. So now, let me reduce this a little bit. Hopefully now we'll be able to refresh this. So now on the web, I have a UI that allows me to connect, to make changes, make queries that I would like to. So if I click on administration, It shows me the database properties, how much percentage is free. I could manage the database from here. So if it shows me how many active users I have, active connections to the database, and then I can click on design. I can create new tables, I can drop tables, I can create new queries, views, stored procedures from here. Okay, so it gives me the full power of SQL Server, but as an instance, I do not have to worry about where the log files are, where the database files are, how do I manage those. So from a developer perspective, it becomes very productive, very easy to use, right? So let's go back one step here. So that's the database part. If I go back to my mobile service that I created, right, it gives me a dashboard. And it says, what OS do you want to start with, right? So I have, as of today, Windows Store, Windows Phone 8, and iOS. Now, keep in mind that this is guidance. It has nothing to do with the mobile service that you created, because the mobile service is platform agnostic, right? So this is just giving you guidance. If you're developing an iOS application, what do you need to do? If you're developing a Windows Phone application, what you need to do, right? So in addition to that, it says if you want to create, let's say phone, if you want to create a new application, then it will give you the guidance what you need to. So it says install the Visual Studio Express, install the mobile services SDK, and then it also lets you create a sample application. So if I click on this, it's going to create a backend database for me, table in the database for me. It will create an application with all the connection strings, everything pre-built, and let me use that for the step-by-step tutorial that is there in this section. So I can walk through that whole tutorial to learn how to connect to a mobile service, how to authenticate, and how to do push notifications, right? If you don't want to create a new one, then you can choose to connect from an existing one. And it gives you the connection strings. So for each platform, if you see here, it will give you guidance as per the platform, right? So if I'm an iOS developer, it tells me exactly what I need to do, how I'm supposed to import these strings, how I'm going to make the connection calls. So this is iOS specific, this is Windows Phone 8 specific. So this is the connection string that I need to use to connect to my mobile services. Now keep in mind that this is something that you should keep confidential, because this is your secret to the service. If you share this with somebody, then that person has full access to your backend service, right? Then we have something called push notifications, and we'll talk about that in later section. But just to give you a glance, we support the Windows notification services, and we support the Apple push notification services. Once we have the Android platform, then support for that will also come. We also support authentication, so we support Microsoft Live ID, we support Facebook, we support Twitter, and then we support Google, right? And we'll cover that in later sections. If I look at the Configure tab, it shows me what database I'm using with my mobile service. I can choose to change the database, right? So at point I want to bring in another database, I can change the database to point to another database. And then there's an option which says enable dynamic schema. Now, as I told you, the main idea of Windows Azure services was to make the developer more productive. So if you choose not to have a full-fledged schema on the server, right, you can create a class on your front end, and depending on the class, we will create the backend database for you. If you change on the fly the columns in the database, on the class, we will update the backend schema for you, right? So, and that is done with this enable dynamic schema option. If I go into production and I want to stop that, then I can just turn it off, and then I will not be able to make any changes to the backend schema. So it's a very productive environment. I really don't need to think about my database up front. I can start developing and building the schema as I go, right? And then you have something called scale, and that allows you to scale your mobile services application as you go along. So we give you up to 10 mobile services free when you sign up. So you can have 10 mobile service applications running at no cost. But then there is a constraint. You can only have 100 I think 65 MB of download per day, right? If you need more, then you need to go either into a shared instance or into a reserved instance, right? And it gives you the instance size, how many instance counts you have, so you can start increasing the instances if you have more load on yours. If you go to the reserved instance, we create a dedicated virtual machine for you, and your application is put into that virtual machine. And if you want, you can create more instances of those virtual machines, so you have high availability, load balancing, and things like that. And then you can even at some point change the database size and the addition of the database. Then we have an option for logs. And this sort of logs all the activity that is happening for my service. So if something goes wrong, right, I can log it in here and I can see from the backend what is happening. So if any errors are occurring, or if I want to log information about my application from the application itself to the logs, I can do that. So I have information, I have errors, I have warnings, I have different type of logs. So hopefully we should have had our SQL Server back, no? Okay, let me just delete this and create a new one. So I can go in and create a new SQL Server connection, and I need to provide the server name, which in our case would be so this is the name of the server that I need to connect to. Oh, sorry, we changed the connection string, so we need to reset this. Okay, so let's go back one step to the database. So I changed, if you notice, I changed the wireless connection. So now I'm on a new IP address. So I have not added that IP address, that's why it's complaining. So I have that new IP address, I saved it. Let's go back to Visual Studio, add a new connection, provide the name of the server, click OK. So it's a SQL Server authentication. Username is MS Evans. Password is my secure password. And then I can pull down a list of databases. So there we go. We have a database. So now I'm able to connect from Visual Studio, right, into my backend SQL Azure database. So it's the same database that we are working from on the IE that I have access to here. So I can see the tables, I have the views, I can create a table from here, right? I can create stored procedures, things like that. Right? Yes. Can't hear you.
All of these tables and databases already exist at Windows Azure or local server.
So what I have created now, right, is a database that's existing in the cloud.
Cloud.
Yes, it's not existing on my local machine.
Local machine.
No.
Or local servers.
Or the local service. It's not exist. I could have created locally and then take it into Windows Azure, but right now they are created on the server itself.
In the cloud.
Come again?
In the cloud.
In the cloud, yes.
I saw it before 2 minutes ago. You didn't write HTTPS or just through the server name.
Yes, because that's how you connect.
How you can know with the server side in the cloud?
Because I'm providing the URL to the server. That's the URL to the server. That's the IP address that the server will connect to. So that is the server DNS name.
Or it's a new type of connection?
No, it's a similar connection. Like if you have a server in your office and somebody gives you the name of the server, that's what you would do. So here you're talking about Visual Studio, right? Yeah. So in Visual Studio, you give the DNS name for the server, and it's going to resolve the yeah. So if you knew the IP address, you could have used the IP address, but on the server, the IP addresses keep changing, so you use the DNS name. Okay. Any questions on this so far? Yes. So if I want to connect to a new server, I just come in, say click here. Sorry. I say connect to a database. I can give the server name, right? So the server name that I gave was from here. So this is your server name, right? So this is the name of the server. Sorry. This is the name of your server, and this is the URL that it points to, right? So your actual server name is RD7792R990H. But when you're connecting it, you need to provide the whole DNS entry and come in here, click on this, give the server authentication, and choose the database and then go from there. Come again? Yeah, it's the same connection. There's nothing different. It's as if you're connecting to an in-premise server. There's nothing different. Same thing. Okay? Yes?
This is what's supposed to happen when we are doing classic Azure development. But here we are talking about something different. I'm supposed to talk to the business logic, which is the mobile services.
Yes.
Which is supposed to talk to the database, right?
Yes.
But what we did here is the classic model of Azure.
No, so what I'm showing you, okay, here what I'm showing you is okay. I'm showing you the options. We've not started with the mobile services yet. Okay, I'm showing you from a connectivity point of view, right? Because many people, when they see the web front end, they say, I'm not comfortable with this. I want to use my traditional Visual Studio or SQL Server Management Studio to work with this database. So I'm just showing you the options that you have when you work with Windows Azure, because this is a traditional database, right? So you can connect from either Visual Studio, you can connect from Management Studio, or you can connect from the web. So I'm just showing you the options that are available for people who don't know. Right? So we've not yet started on the Azure mobile services and how that talks to the database and does things. But from a developer perspective, you will either create the schema yourself, right? Or you will ask the mobile services to create the schema for you. So I'm going to cover both of those scenarios. So if I am a traditional developer, I like to create my schema up front. I want to have, a clear thought on how my schema is going to look. I want more control on the schema. Take the schema first and then start developing the services. You can do that. Or if you want to just develop ad hoc, you are testing, you want to create the class first, and you don't want to worry about the database, you can do that also. So I'm going to show you both the options, and then it's up to you what pattern you feel comfortable with. Then you can adopt that, right? So we are going to build an application called MS Events. It's an application that provides end users capability of looking at the different category of events that Microsoft is going to hold. He can select a category, subscribe to category so that he's notified when new events are added. You can add new events, right? So we're going to build some of that logic, just enough to help us understand what mobile services is, right? So for that, I need to have some kind of a schema to store my information. So what we need is probably an events table where I'm going to have my events. I need to have a category table where I'm going to have my category of events, right? I need to have a location where the event is going to be held. I need to have a country where that location exists. So I'm going to create those schemas, right? And I'll do that from the web UI. So I'm going to start with the traditional approach where I'm going to create a schema, right? And then I'm going to talk to mobile services. Then later on in the day, we are going to talk from the class and create the schema on the fly using dynamic schema. Fine? So we go back here. So I can create a new query. Now, keep in mind that, and this is something I have realized, that when you create the schema, it usually looks for the alias, and that is the alias that you created the name of the mobile service. So for example, if I go and say there's nothing here, but if I come and click, let's say, create a table from here in mobile service. So I go to mobile service. This is my service. I go to data and say add table, right? So now you're going from mobile service to SQL Server, and I click demo. And here it gives me the option to control the permissions that I'm going to provide onto that data. So should I allow anybody to insert? Should I allow anybody to update? You have different options. You can allow everybody to update. You can have people only who know that application key, or only authenticated users, right? Or people who have only script, or who are coming from a script, or have admin privileges. So I will leave it as a default, click OK. And this is going to go and create a table in SQL Server for me. Now, whenever it creates a table, it creates a column called ID. Do not change that column name, because much of the logic in the server side relies on that's the unique identifier. It's lowercase ID, right? So leave that the way it is. If I come back to my SQL Server and I do a refresh on the tables, if you see here, I get an alias saying mobile demo. So that is the name I created my mobile service with, and the table was created with a single column called ID, right? I could come back here and click on demo. Sorry. And go to tables, columns, and then I can see the columns that I have in my table. Now, the way you would create columns from here is through code, right? Or if you want to have a schema, then you come to SQL Server and create your full table from there. So that's what we are going to do now. Sorry. So I'm going to pick up a few scripts that we have. So as I said, we have a category table, right, which has all the categories. We have a country table, we have an event table, we have a location table, and we have something called a user category table. And I will talk about this in a while. So let's start creating these tables. And let's go back to Visual Studio and then just refresh these. So now I have my category table. It has a category name and an image, right? So the image points to the category of, so if it's a Visual Studio event or a developer event, probably I will show a Visual Studio image. If it's a Windows kind of an event, then I'll show a Windows logo. Phone event, then I'll show a phone logo. Then I have the list of countries here, the country code and name. I have the event, so what's the title of the event, what category does it belong to, when is the event going to start, and things like this. So this is my schema. Now, I also have something called the user category table. Now, the user category table is something that we are going to use for our push notification services. So if I am a user of that application and I want to subscribe to an event category, right? So I need to go and log this user and saying this user would like to subscribe to this category. So I need the category ID and I need the user ID. So that's what this table does, right? So let's close these. I will also go and add some dummy data. So we have some categories, we have some but before that, I want to show you something else. If I come back to mobile services and click on mobile demo, go to data, I don't see my tables here, right? The reason you don't see your table here because you have brought in the schema from SQL Server. The Azure Mobile Services is not aware of those tables yet. Okay, so I brought in an existing schema in the SQL Server. the mobile services has no idea of what happened at the SQL Server backend. So to create that connection, I'm just going to go and create those tables here. So it's not actually going to create a table, but it's going to create a link between the existing table and the mobile services, right? So we started with category. We had country. We had location. We had event. And then we had user category. Fine. Clean this out. So now I have created these. If I click on any one of those, if you see, I'll see the schema that I created. It's just not a single ID, so it does not go and recreate the table. It just creates a linkage between services, the mobile Azure services, and the backend schema, right? Yes? The underlying technology is link? Yeah. No. So the technology behind mobile service is Node.js. So I'll talk about that in a while. So, okay, let's talk about it now. So when the team started building mobile services, the question was, what is the language that we are going to use for the backend scripting, right? And the decision was to go with JavaScript, because you have iOS developers, you have Java developers, you have .NET developers. And the commonality between all of these is JavaScript. So any developer sometime or the other would have used JavaScript and will have some familiarity with JavaScript. But if you are an iOS developer, then to come to C# or VB is difficult, right? If you are a C# developer and you want to go to Java, it's difficult, right? It's a whole new learning experience. But JavaScript is something that sometime or the other we have used, we have some familiarity, and it's a language that it can easily be learned. The learning curve is not that high, right? So the backend of this is Node.js. So it's all of the backend scripting is in JavaScript, okay? So I have created the tables. I have created the linkage between the Windows Azure mobile services and this SQL Server. I'm going to create a few scripts for data. So I've got a category in there. I've got the country. I'll create some dummy events. Create a location. Fine. If I go back here to my service, it shows me the number of records I have against each table, right? So with that, we'll take a short break, 10 minutes. We come back and then we start building the application that will go and touch mobile Azure services. Okay? How are you? Doing fine. We have created a blank project for our Windows Phone 8 application. So let's connect the dots. Let's connect our Windows Phone 8 application to the backend Azure service. So the first thing, as I told you, you need a connection string to your backend. If we go to the dashboard, go to mobile services, go here, go to the dashboard. Sorry. So I want to connect an existing application and I need this connection string. So I'm just going to take it, copy it, and go to Visual Studio. Let's close this. And let's open the app.xaml.cs file. Now, in Windows Phone 8, the app.xaml file is your application startup file, right? It's something which is analogous to your main in a traditional application or global.asx in a web application, right? So this is where all the startup events happen. So in here, we are going to create the connection for the mobile service. And I need to bring in a reference to the mobile services client. So I'll say add reference, Windows Phone extensions, and then I have the Azure mobile services client. Click OK. And then I'll bring a using statement for this. So you're set to go. So what I am doing here is I'm creating a static property called mobile services in the app class, right? And I'm creating a new instance, passing in the URI for my mobile service and the application key, right? So the first time I'm going to call this is going to create a new service and associate it with this property, right? Then what I need is my classes that are going to represent my data. So let's bring those in. So I will create a few folders here. So we need one for the model. We need one for the view model. And add existing item. So bring the data model, and I'll explain this to you in a while. We bring one more folder called common. Okay. So I've brought in a couple of files and let's go through these. So the first one is our view model. So if you work with the UI, right, you know that we need to implement notify property change interface so that, you know, whenever our class has any change in data, that's reflected onto the UI. Now previously what used to happen is when we created the notify property changed classes, we used to provide the name of the property in the notified change property event, right? So in here what I used to do is whenever I used to raise the property, I used to provide the property name, and that used to be a string. What used to happen is when I refactor the property, I give it another name, and I forget to change the string, then things used to go haywire, right? So what they have introduced in 4.5 is something called the column member name. So it takes the name of the property and uses that. So even if you change the property name, your application class is going to work properly. So what I have done is I have extracted that out as an interface separately, and I'm going to use that as a base of all my classes. So I have this set property method which is going to take a column member name and then raise the property. And then I have this these classes, right, which represent my data. So I have here the category class. Sorry, wrong place. So we have the category class, right, which I'm implementing from view model, and I am naming this as category ID. So in my class, the property is called category ID, but in the backend database, it's called ID. Right? So if I want to have a different name from the database, I can use the data member name property to provide a different name in the database. Right? So I have the category ID, I have the category name, and then I have the image. So similarly, I have for the user category, the event, the country, the location. Channel is something we will talk about later on, and that's something that we are going to create from the class into the database. Right? So I'm going to show you how you can create a dynamic schema from your application into the database. So I have the models in here, and then I have a data source, right, which is basically going to go and create go and retrieve the data and have all the data management for me. So I'm going to come back to this app.xaml class, and I'm going to go to pages, and in here I have this static view model that I have defined. So I am creating a view model, right, of type data source. It's a static property. So now I can reference that from my code. I do not have to keep reinstantiating it every time. And whenever I check if it is not there, then I create a new data source and I return the data source. So let's start hooking these things together. So I have my main page. So what I want to do on the main page is list all the category of events, right, as a starting point. So in here we are going to change the name of the application. So it's going to be called MS Events. The page name is going to be called Category. And then in here, I need a list box that's going to give me all the categories. So let's bring that code snippet in. So I'm creating a long list selector, and if you have attended the last session we did on Windows Phone 8, we said that the list box has been replaced with the long list selector. Right? I give it a name, and we can remove this out. We don't need this. And then in the data template, I have a text box which is bound to the category name of the category class. So in here, I'm binding my item source of the list box to the categories. So if you see the data source, I have created a collection of categories of type category, right? And this is what I am binding to. So we come back here to our main page. So whenever this application starts up, so I want to say this dot loaded file this event, right? And in here I want to say this dot data context is equal to app dot view model, right? So I have created this data source. I'm taking that and I'm binding it to my main page, and then the list I'm binding to the categories, and the text box I'm binding to the category name. Fine. And in here what I want to do is I want to say app.viewModel.initialize. So I'm initializing my database for the first time when I start this application. So if you go back to our data source and look at the initialize method, right? I will just comment these out. So in the initialize method, I'm just checking if it has been initialized or not. If it's not been initialized, then I go and load the categories from the mobile service. So here I'm actually calling out to the mobile service and saying, give me a list of all the categories. So if I come back to my portal and I go to data and I click on category, I have something called scripts, and I have various scripts. I have script for insert, update, delete. So all the CRUD operations are here, right? And if I seek read, I get a query, right? I get a user object, and then I get a request object, right? So the query is the actual query that I am passing from my client. Now in here I can tap into that query, add additional filters, change this script, do other operations on this, and then return the data back to the user. We're going to look at that in a while, but right now for the category it's going to be straightforward. We don't need anything. So we just come in and say request.execute, and it's going to execute the query for us. So let's build this, and let's deploy this to the emulator and see how it goes. So the first instance when this fires up, it's a virtual machine, so it's going to deploy the OS. It takes some amount of time. Okay. I'm going to try it with the other connection that I have. Because we faced this problem even yesterday. If the Wi-Fi connection is not good, then the emulator is not able to go out. But let's give it a try again. Network. Seems it's not working. I'm going to deploy it to my device and try to show you from the device itself. Come again. There it is. Fine. So now I have my list of categories that I had created on the server, right? So I am now going into mobile services, requesting a read operation, and it is returning that data back to me. I am populating my categories class. I'm creating a collection of categories and I'm binding that to the UI. So from a development perspective, it is the same. Right? What is important to understand here is now my backend logic is going to be standard for all the devices that I'm going to create, right? All the applications that I'm going to create for the different devices. So this same API will be used for my iOS application, for my Windows 8 application, and for my Windows Phone application, right? So it's the same set of classes, same backend. There's going to be no change. So the effort that I'm going to do in building these applications, creating the backend is going to be significantly reduced. Okay? So let's take this application further. I want to subscribe to these categories, right? So whenever a new event is added for this category, I want to be notified. And for that, I need to be authenticated. I need to have a user ID that I can take and add to the database saying I am who I am, right? So you need a way to identify me, and for that we are going to use Twitter. So let's stop this. So if I go to Twitter, I go to dev.twitter.com and I log in with my 301. Okay. Just let me write this down. Okay. Okay. Okay, so I'm now already logged into Twitter, and if I come here, I have something called My Applications. And in here I can create a new application, and we'll call this Mobile Demo Riyadh. Give the same name here. And in the website, we go back to our mobile service. Go to the dashboard, and we pick up the URL for the mobile service. And the return path is the same. Accept the agreement. So I am creating an application on Twitter which is now going to help me authenticate against Twitter. Come again. So now it has created that application for me. The most important is these two, the consumer key, which I go back to my portal, and in the identity tab, inside Twitter settings, I put the consumer key, and the consumer secret. So now this is going to help me connect from my application to Twitter and allow you to authenticate against Twitter. Fine. So let's save that. So we have set up the Twitter settings. And then from the client, I need to start authenticating the user. So in here, I have created a method called login Twitter, right? And then I'm calling an authenticate method, and I'm passing in the provider of the authentication. Now this could be Twitter, it could be Facebook, it could be Google, it could be Microsoft account, it could be any one of those four. For our case, we are going to. So I have extracted that logic into a separate method, because tomorrow if you want to pass another provider, you can easily do that, right? And basically what this does is, it's a simple one line of code. It says this user, okay, so you await app.mobile service login asynchronously with the provider that I gave you, and it's going to return to you an user. If it's authenticated, then you are going to go and log yourself in. If it's not authenticated, then it's going to give you an error message, right? And then I have this mobile service user that I have created within, which I have defined up here. Okay, so this is all it basically does. It calls into the Azure mobile services and asks for authentication. Now, this one line of code removes all the burden of from you to have to create SQL Server table, manage its login user ID, encrypts its password, create a method to reset the password. You are taken away from all of this, and we have one mechanism of just delegating this to a third party and saying, please authenticate this user for me. If you authenticate it, then I'm okay with it. Right? So this is not authorization, this is just authentication. We just need to identify this person is who he says he is. Right? So let's run this and see if this works. Sorry. So in the initialize method, when we call the initialize method, we need to call this. So rebuild the solution, and then we deploy it. So now you see I'm now taken to the Twitter's login page. I can enter my credentials and it's going to authenticate me. So I can authenticate myself here. And then I have a unique user ID from Twitter that I can use in my application to provide other features. Okay? So let's stop this here. So now I have authenticated myself. I have connected my application to Twitter. I have created an authentication mechanism, and I have a user ID that I can use for my subscriptions. Right? So let's start building that in. So for that, I want to have a way from the main page to create a subscription, to go to the subscription page. So the way we would do that is we'll create an app bar. So I'm going to create an app bar. Right, with two buttons, one for settings and one for subscriptions. Right. Now I also want to show you something here. So if I want to, what happened? So if I go to blend from here, there's some things which blend is really good at, and this is one of them. So if I want to change this application bar, right, I have this button settings. I can go in here and I can say give me a local URI, and I can come in here and choose the icon I like settings. And then for the subscribe button, I'm going to go and choose something different. Let's say favorites. Close this, and then in Visual Studio I'm going to reload. What it does is, if you look at the assets page, it creates an app bar folder, and it has brought in the icons for those two images and put them in here. Right? So I can have some nice icons that are pre-built into Visual Studio using Blend. So let's start hooking this up. So I have two event handlers. Let's create them. So when I create the subscribe, click the subscribe button on the app bar, I want to be redirected to a page where I can bring in all the categories and the user can subscribe to. So right? So this is standard Windows Phone stuff, nothing new here. Add a new page, and we'll call this subscriptions. Fine. Now here is where it starts getting interesting. Now, what do I want to do? I want a list of all the categories that are existing, and then I want a list of the subscriptions that I have in the database, right? But right now my user category table is empty because I have not subscribed to that. So if I just return the user category table, then I get nothing. If I return the user or the category table, then I do not know which subscriptions I have. So what I need to do is I need to create a join where I get all the categories and also the subscriptions that I have. So I need to join the category table to the user category table with a left outer join, right? So let's see how we do that. As I told you earlier, we have something in mobile services which allows you to perform read operations. It's the read method that we can tap into. So if you go back to data, you go to user category. Now, pay attention here. My user category table has category ID and user ID, right? It has no category name. But I am going to return a category name from here. So in the read operations, I'm going to remove this line and replace it with this text. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a select statement, right? Let's take this into our portal and see what it does. So if you see here, I am bringing all the category names from the category table with its category ID and a list of users who have subscribed to that particular category. But right now I have not subscribed to any category. But then I only need users, right? Or I need only those subscriptions that belong to me, right? So that is why if you see here, I have put in a condition saying, give me only the user IDs that are belonging to me, and I get that from the server user.userid object, right? So as I told you, once you authenticate, the server understands this user and it has a user ID object, right? So I'm saying run a SQL query with this SQL statement, pass in this parameter, and if you have a successful execution, right, then respond back to the client saying everything was okay and these are the results. So it's just a simple JavaScript function that I call. So it's an inline JavaScript function that I create, right? It's passed the results from the SQL query and it takes those results and passes it back to the user. So let's change this here. Now when I'm inserting into this table, right, I'm inserting the user ID. But if I send the user ID from the client, right, somebody could, create an application if they know the call to my backend, and then they could sort of, put in a dubious user ID, or they know my user ID, they could play with it. So instead of that, what you could do is, in the insert itself, I can come here and I can say item.user ID is equal to user.user ID. So I'm taking the one that is more authenticate, which is from the server itself, and replacing the one that is coming from the client. Also, in the query, we are returning back the category name, right? And if you look at the class that we created, I showed you earlier, the category has a category name. But this is, when it goes back to the server, it's going to fail because there is no category name. So what I want to do is I want to get rid of that. And the way you do that, you say item, you say delete item.category name. So I'm actually removing an object from that class. I am removing a property from the class, right? Since it's all JSON, it's very easy for me to do that. I'm actually removing that property. So the class name is removed, and I'm just going to put in the user ID and the username. The category ID and the user ID. Fine? And then I execute. So let's run this application again. So it's now going to go and authenticate me. I put in my user ID, put in my secure password that everybody has seen. I get logged in, go to the category table, hit on my subscriptions button, and nothing happens. Yes, because we did not hook up the code. So in the client, in the subscription page, we created the page, but we didn't do anything there. All right, so let's go and, so we haven't done anything to this page, right? We just created a blank page, we haven't really done anything here. So let's start playing with this page. Go back, we call that So what I want here now is again a list box, right? That is going to have the category name and a checkbox next to it, right? Which I can check or uncheck to subscribe to that particular category. So let's bring some piece of XAML here. So this is our list box. So now I am binding my item source of the list box to the user categories, right? Similarly, I did with the categories. I am now binding it to the user categories, and I have a checkbox and I have a text box with the category name. Now, what I'm returning back is a user ID. It's a text string. It can be either null or it could have the user's user ID in it. Right? But the isCheck property does not understand that. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a converter that's going to convert from text into a Boolean. Right? So I already have that in place. Let me show you. So I have this string to Boolean converter. I'm implementing the I value converter, and I check if the value is null, then I return a false. If it is not null, then I return a true, right? And that's all I do. Close this. And then to use this, I go back to my app.xaml and I create a namespace. I call it converter, and this brings me the msevents.com. So I'm bringing a reference to that library that holds this class, and in here I'm going to say converter, and I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to call that my converter. Right? So now, since I have defined this at the application resources level, I can use this anywhere in my application. Right? So close this, and then I can use it in the binding. So I'm saying this is checked property is bound to the user ID, but then don't take the default value of the user ID, apply a converter and pass whatever comes in the user ID to the converter, and this is my converter, and then whatever is returned from the converter is going to be bound to the checkbox. Right? So that is the UI part. Let's hook up the page itself. So in here we say this dot data context is equal to app dot view model. Right? We bring the data context to this page, and then we say this dot loaded is to subscription loaded, and in here I say app dot view model dot load user category. Right? And this is let's rebuild this solution. Okay. So let's rebuild this solution and deploy it and see what happens. So now I have the list of categories. I click on the subscription button. It's going to bring me all the categories, right, with a checkbox. Now if I check this, uncheck this, I need to go and insert into my user category table, right? And that we do here. So I'm going to import the view model here using msevents.models. So what I'm doing here is I am creating a reference to this checkbox that's sending me this click event, right? So I get a reference to that checkbox, and that checkbox, since it's data bound, I can tap into the data context property and look at the category to which it is bound to, right? So I am tapping into the category, the user category that it's bound to, and picking the category name. So now I get the category name for which I am subscribing or unsubscribing, right? And I do a link query to actually go into that user categories table and fetch me the user category object, right? And I then create a new user category I pass it the user category ID, the category ID and the user ID, and then but since I am not going to use the name, right, I am not going to pass the name in here. And then I check if it is already there in that list. If it's not there in the list, then I'm going to go and call the app.mobileservice to go and add this into the database. Now, one more thing I need to do here is, since it's an asynchronous call, I need to mark this as asynchronous. Right? So here I am creating an object, and then I'm taking that object and passing it using the insert async to the table. And this is now going to go make a call to the service and add my table, my record there. Now what's going to happen on the server side is, since I'm not going to use the name, it's going to remove the name, add the actual user ID from the server, and insert that data to the database. Right? And if it is unchecked, then I go and delete that record from the database. So let's run this. So now I can go and hit subscribe. Let's go back to the backend. And there you go. So now it has gone, taking my user ID, remove the category name, and insert this record into the user category table. I can go in and add one more record. Go and browse. You have two records. We add one more. And then we can go and unsubscribe this. Something wrong happened. No, I think what happened is, yeah. So I am, what I'm missing here is the I'm missing the key. There you go. Okay, so I was actually missing the key because that is what it's going to use to do the lookup and then remove the record out. Okay, so now we have tied into the backend service, right? We've created the category list, we created the subscription list. Now we have a list of subscriptions. How are we doing on time? It's about 12. Do you want to take a short break? We continue for another session and then close for lunch. Is that okay? How do you want to do it? Good? Okay. So we'll come back and then we'll start looking at the push notifications.